Welcome back, folks. I have been working as a web developer, a full stack web developer, since more than 3 years now in Canada. I have worked for 3 to 4 different companies, and I've seen all sort of garbage when it comes to REST API. I've seen some great designs, I've seen some bad designs. And today, all my focus, all my goal is to give you fundamentals on how you can make and design your APIs in a better way, right? Because you might be a front-end developer who just consumes APIs because you're at the client side, you are making websites and consuming some API, or you might be a backend developer creating those APIs. And today we'll be focusing on REST APIs. There's also something called as GraphQL, but we'll keep that for another video. And today, either you're consuming or you are creating APIs, or you're a full stack developer doing both. It is very important to know what are some of the common designs that you should follow and some of the most common mistakes that you should definitely avoid. That is my focus of today's video. And if you don't know me, if you don't know this channel, my name is Pranav. I'm one of the co-hosts of this channel. I run this channel with my girlfriend Kritika, and we try to make very resourceful videos for you so that you can learn more. We both love teaching. We're also part-time teachers in Concordia University. It's a university in Montreal, and we are also working as full stack developers for different companies. Now, the first thing is, if you want to create better APIs, you have to be consistent. Now, if you don't know what REST API is, this is not a video of introducing REST APIs and telling you what API is, etc. Right? We can make another video about that, but I'll just give you a brief overview that REST APIs are supposed to look something like this. For example, users and orders. So when it comes to be consistent, consistency can be done in multiple ways. First of all, your API endpoints that you can see here, like orders and users, they should be consistent. For example, when it's a get API call, right? And you see something like this, user slash ID. What should it mean? REST APIs are supposed to be, okay, let me rephrase. When you see a REST API endpoint, you should be able to tell what it's supposed to do. That is the goal, right? So as soon as someone sees this, they'll see, okay, we are trying to get a user with ID that is passed over here, right? So this can be users and then 1 2. So here we are trying to get a user with ID 12. Now some people prefer singular, some people prefer plural. I prefer plural, and I'll shortly tell you the reason for that. The reason for that is because if we have a get API request and we want all the users, we would do something like this. We would just not pass the ID, right? So as soon as you see something like that, you already know. You know that in this one, we are getting all the users, and in this one, we are getting the user only with ID, whatever you pass, 1 2 3 4 5 6. It can be a string, anything like that, right? I hope you get the idea. The second thing is that same thing should follow with all other designs, because now if you create this one with just user, because you can argue we are just returning one user, why should we should write users, right? Then it just becomes inconsistent and difficult to understand. So you should either follow user and user ID, or you should just follow users. You should just follow plural. It is my personal favorite, and most good companies follow this design as well. So if you follow this, it would be at least one good practice. And all your API should be consistent, right? For example, if instead of get, this was a post, sorry, if instead of get, this was a delete command, right? In that case, this should be now again straightforward. You should know that you are trying to delete a user with ID 1 2 3, right? In that, it can be any ID, obviously. And most often, you should not allow command like this one, because now a user might try to delete all the users. Although if this endpoint is available, it should be clear that if someone goes here, he or she will delete all the users, right? But most companies or most good projects would avoid this. They would send an error message when we try to delete everything, because it might be a mistake and it might be very costly or very painful if they by mistake delete all the data in your database. But it's just up to you. It depends on project to project, right? And moving forward, then you also need to have same authentication mechanism for all endpoints, right? Because in some of the endpoints, you might have authentication mechanisms by passing a session ID. In some others, you might ask for an API key. In some others, you might ask everything. So try to avoid that. Try to keep it simple so that the person consuming your APIs can simply follow one mechanism throughout their project. Then you should have same error codes. For example, error code 404, which is one of the most common error codes, it should always return 404 only when the resource is not found. It should not return 404 when the user is unauthenticated or the request is incorrect, in that case you should not return 404, right? So that's just common sense, but it's very important to apply that, because most developers, what I see is they'll just send 400. 400 means there's an error and they won't tell what kind of error it is. So you need to be consistent, you need to return correct error codes, and we'll dive deeper into that when we talk more about error codes. And obviously, last but not the least, the delete command should actually delete something, right? This is again very important. It's kind of basic, right? But some people use edit command. So most of the times we use something like put to edit something. I have seen these API calls that go to the put endpoint, but they actually delete in the end, because they say, well, deletion is also some kind of editing, right? So why not use the put command? So you should not do that. You should use post for creation, patch for updating a particular element, get for getting or retrieving something, post for creating something, and delete for deleting something. You should always use that, and these five are the most common one. Doesn't mean these are the only ones. I think there are 10 or 12 different kind of methods, but if you know these five, you would be good to go for a long time. The second one is that you should return ISO formatted UTC dates. Now, you might be wondering what is that if you don't use it already. So let me just go to NDN doc that says what an ISO type string is. So ISO type string is something like this. It returns, for example, year, month, date, and then the time zone, etc. Now, why is it important, right? Why is time zone important? Why you should not return, let's say, a date that user can show in their browser very easily? Because you don't know where your API endpoint is being accessed from, right? Your API endpoint might be accessed from a different city. Let's say in Canada, in Montreal, and in Vancouver, the time zones are different, right? So if you as an API creator wants to handle that, it can be very difficult, and you're trying to handle something that should be on the client side, right? There's this separation of concern. The display part is something that the client side developer should handle. So if you're creating an API, and that API might be consumed in WordPress websites, in React websites, in Angular websites, doesn't matter. But if you pass a date, a standardized date with the time zone, the client side developer can simply translate that date to their language, to their time zone, and display the correct time, right? So if you just return 5 p.m., right? If you just return this order was placed on 3rd March at 5 p.m. Now 5 p.m. for you is different than from 5 p.m. for them. Obviously, right? That's common sense. But sometimes we forget to return that it was 5 p.m. EST, Eastern Standard Time, or IST, Indian Standard Time. These things are important. So rather than getting into what time zone you should return, you should just return a standardized date, and that is easy to handle in the client side as well. Now, third point, public endpoint should be handled as an exception. This is one of the most, less known facts, but this is very important when it's come to REST APIs. So most REST APIs are usually authenticated and require some kind of authentication. Imagine if you're making tomorrow's facebook.com, right? Some APIs might be available for the public, right? You might say that, there are 5 sets of APIs that are available for the whole public. Doesn't matter whose account it is, we will show it to everyone. Okay. But then if I log into my Facebook account, right? And then Facebook wants to get the list of my friends, that is a protected API endpoint, right? Because you, Paul or Paula, should not go to Facebook and get my friend list. You should not get my messages, right? It is authenticated, it is secured behind an authorization. This is obvious. So in that case, I have seen that at least 95% of all the API endpoints any company, in this case, let's talk about Facebook, would have are authenticated, are protected behind a password or authentication system. 5% are usually the ones that are public. But what developers do is, while creating the backend, while designing the APIs, they would say, all my APIs are unsecure by default. If I need to add security, I will add the security code in my API. Well, that doesn't that sound wrong, right? If you have 100 API requests and you make all of them, first of all, unsecured, and then you say, okay, request number 1 should be authorized, 2 authorized, 3 authorized, 4 it can be public, 5 authorized, and then you make all the others authorized. So you are doing something 95 times because you're making an exception for just 5 requests that were unauthorized. I hope I didn't confuse you, but all I'm trying to say is that public endpoint should be an exception. By default, you should consider all your API endpoints as authorized, right? And if there's a public endpoint, you should only make that one public and remove the authorization code from that. In that way, it would avoid you making very expensive mistakes. Because let's say you wanted to add a new API call 101, right, or 102. In that case, it would be authenticated by default. So you won't have to worry about someone stealing your data because it's already authorized, it's already authenticated. And later on, if you decide to make it public, well, you can do that as well. So it would help you, it would give you more security, it would give you more peace of mind, which is all we aim for in development, right? Next thing, this one is very important. You should give some kind of health check API endpoint to all your users because sometimes shit goes to the fan, right? Sometimes the API endpoint or your backend is down and a client can make a request. Let's say you developed an API and it is used by 10 different companies or 10 different projects. They might think when they request and they get an error code, they might think they are doing something wrong, right? But maybe your just server is down. So you should provide an endpoint like health or just ping so that they can check when they go to that endpoint, and this must be public, right? It's very important. This one should be a public endpoint. When anyone goes to this endpoint, it should return health good or health bad so that they know that in this case our server is down, the REST API is down, right? If health doesn't work, then nothing else would work. So this would be kind of a first check. For example, when you go inside a car and your car doesn't start, you know the problem is something with the car. It's not with your key, it's not with anything else. It's just a bad example, but I hope you get the idea. The next thing is versioning your APIs. This is again very important. Why? Because in the last example, we said that your API might be consumed by 10 different projects or 10 different companies. Now, just because you want to change something to an API doesn't mean that other companies or other projects using your API would be as quick and as well maintained as your API, and they might all start failing. And then they will start complaining, right? They will say, I used your API, so I used ABC company's API or average company's API in this case, right? And they might say, well, because I use your API endpoint and now you have changed things and things were not backward compatible, my company is suffering, which is not great, right? Imagine, let me give you a non-code related example. So I live in Canada. So government of Canada keeps on creating new rules on how the houses should be built, right? But the rules in 1950 are different than rules in 2000, are different than rules in 2020. So in 2021 or 2022, if they pass a new rule that houses should be built a certain way, they don't start penalizing the houses that were built 20 years ago. Why? Because they say if you were built 20 years ago, you should follow the rules that were present 20 years ago, right? That makes sense. So things should be backward compatible. So all the new houses that would be made from this year should follow today's code. Old houses won't be penalized. Makes sense. So you should provide something like this. For example, this is V1, right? So you can just request them to go to V1 of your API, and this one can be V2, or it's just different ways of writing some version. But most companies or most people don't even think about versioning, right? Whenever you start a new project, you should use either something like this, the first example, or the second example. Because in this case, even if you change something, if you change how APIs work, old ones won't be impacted, right? So let's say from this one, you go to API v2, and in API v2, you have, instead of health, you have a ping, right? In this case, all the ones consuming your version 1 API won't be affected, but the new ones who will consume your version 2 APIs might like something and might start using that because that is improved and updated and blah blah blah, right? I hope you get the idea. If you don't, let me know. I would be happy to reply to all of your questions, all of your comments. So if you have any questions or concerns, or you just want to, or you're just happy about the video, let us know in the comments down below. Hit the like button. And now let's go to step number 6, which is correct status codes. This is again very important. I have seen most people not using this feature. If this feature exists, you should use it, right? Error code 200 means success. Now, developers return success in all successful cases. That's not true, right? Because let's think. Let's say you created an API, and that API is used by a company in France, used by a company in Germany, used by a company in Ukraine, by a company in India. All those countries have different languages, right? Now, if you just return 200 with a message called success, they might not know what success is if they don't speak English, right? So, status code is important because status code is a number, and numbers are the same everywhere in the world. So, 200 is for success, 201 is for successful creation. So, if you return 201 for a create command, they would know that the thing was created successfully. And this is even more important when it comes to the error codes. As I said, most people just return 400 error code whenever things break. But if your request is correct, but it's just unauthorized, and you don't return 401, they might think they're making an incorrect request. So you should return 401 when the request is unauthorized. So again, they can, without even reading the message, they can just read the number and they can figure out what is wrong. And 404, which is the most common one, 404 not found, right? It is for missing resources. Again, important to know and important to follow. Number seven, creating correct and predictable HTTP methods. Now, this one we have already covered in a few examples, but let's just go here. If you see an API like this, localhost 8080 and then books, what do you think it should do? It's a get API, as you can see here. What do you think it should do? Get means it's trying to retrieve something, and it's trying to retrieve all the books available in my computer or in the server, right? So that is what it is supposed to do, right? And therefore, all the HTTP methods should be predictable. Now let's go to step 8 because step 8 will cover 7 as well. So when you see something like this, get user, right? Or better, make it get users. This means you're trying to retrieve all the users. Now, if you saw another API, which is get users, and then here we might have an ID, this means you're trying to get only one user, but you're still trying to retrieve something. So in this case, you're trying to retrieve one user with ID, right? Let's think about another one. If you have something like this, let me just copy this so that I don't waste my time and yours. And in this case, this might be a delete, right? So in this case, you're trying to delete one user with an ID, right? It becomes clear. When you see a command, you should understand what it might be doing, right? Next, let's go to creation because we haven't talked about creation yet. So when you see something like this means you're trying to create a user, right? You can't pass an ID, right? Because right now the user doesn't even exist. So how can you say that I want to create a user with ID 10, right? Because a user with ID 10 might already exist in the database. So you should never pass IDs in a post or create commands, right? You should always pass this. Now, try to guess what does this one mean. This is the last one that we'll cover in the self-explanatory name section. Try to guess what this one means, right? This one says that I want to create a notification. So this is a post. Post means create. I want to go to users. I want to go to a particular user because I'm also passing an ID. So let's imagine it's a Facebook notification. So it might say, I want to go to users, then user ID 123, and I want to create a new notification for them. So this would eventually look something like this. It would look like users slash 123 slash notifications. So this is a create command, and hence this would create a notification for user with ID 123. If it was a put command, that means you're trying to update a notification, right? Imagine this was a put command. In this case, this is not enough because now you're trying to edit something that already exists. So you should tell what you are trying to edit. You're trying to edit a user with ID 123 and you want to edit a notification, right? But you have to tell what notification ID you want to edit. So your notification ID might be 100. So now this says it is easy to read. It says I want to edit a notification for the user 123 and the ID for that notification is 100. So if you're seeing REST APIs for the first time, this might look a little overwhelming, but I hope if you know REST APIs, what they are, I hope it gives you some clarity. Now let's see something that you should never do. People use something like this, get, and then the endpoint is get user. Well, how does that make sense, right? If it's a get type command, then you should already return the user, right? You don't need to write get user. This would do, or this would suffice, right? So let's see two or three examples. So get users should give you all the users. Post users should create a new user. Put users. In this case, you need to pass an ID, right? This should edit a user. Delete with users. And again, you probably want to delete one user at a time. So again, in this case, you want to pass an ID. So as soon as you read the endpoint is just this part, right? As soon as you read the endpoint, you should be able to tell what it's trying to do. That's the goal of REST APIs, because REST is a standard that people maintain so that you can create the API like that and you don't have to worry about what it might be doing or how someone might understand or might not understand what is happening, right? Now, let's see the next one. Next one is that you should give standard error response. This is again very important and very less followed. Your error responses should be standard so that anyone who sees the error response should be able to guess what is happening, right? Now the message is kind of it's kind of let's just say audience is divided for this. Some say message is important, some say message are not important. Doesn't matter. As long as you follow standard error codes, just like this one. For example, this one says user not found, right? It could be another command. Let's say someone was trying to create a user and did not pass an email ID. In that case, you would say email missing, right? And the message would obviously be different, right? It can be anything, doesn't matter. But if you pass the correct code, at least the client or the front end developer or the website knows that what the error is. Now in the front end, they could handle this, right? That's why some people say messages are not really very helpful, because let's say you're returning the message in English, but even in Canada, there are two languages, right? There's English and French. So the front-end developer can't really use your message. Although you're trying to help them, they might not be able to show a meaningful message that you sent, because first of all, it might not be user-friendly. Second of all, it might not be in the user's preferred language. Someone could speak Spanish, Hindi, Italian, French, English, and in that case, returning an error code, something like this, would help the developer just to understand what this error might be. And then the developer, he or she, might display a meaningful message, a client-friendly message, and a user-friendly message, sorry, and in their language. Now, the last part that we'll cover today is pagination. Again, this is important. Now, let's assume someone wanted to get a list of orders, right? And let's say give me all the orders for customer number 123. What if the customer number has 10,000 orders, right? Do you really want to return 10,000 orders? Because first of all, it is waste of resources. Second of all, the request will take a long time. You'll have to query a lot, and the response you return would be very heavy. So it will take more time to be downloaded on the client side. If the client is just going to show 10 orders at a time, do you really need to send 10,000? Obviously not, right? So you should add something like a page number and a page size. So whenever someone makes a request and asks for, let's say, orders, right? So let's say your endpoint was something like this: users, user ID, orders, and then you can use pagination, right? So in this case, the client could send, I am on page number equals to 1, and my page size is 10. So in this case, you have to return the first 10 orders for this user, right? If the same API, if the same client sends you something like this, should be and I think if the same client sends you like something like this, then you know that you are supposed to return 10 orders, but not 1 to 10, from 11 to 20, because they're requesting for page number 2. So you'll go to your database and get all the orders that are from order number 11 to order number 20. You're still returning them 10, but this time this is page number 2. Therefore, making your API request faster and giving the client only what he or she needs, right? You could do 20, right? And you could ask for page number 5. What does this mean? You don't want to return 0 to 20. No. You don't want to return 21 to 40. You don't want to return 41 to 60, etc., etc. But what you might want to return, you don't want to return 61 to 80. Let's make this, you probably want to return 81 to 100, right? This would help the developer, this would help the backend know that I want to return the orders from 81 to 100 and not the first 80, right? This just helps everyone. This helps the backend developers so they don't make very noisy or very powerful requests, slowing things down for everyone. It helps the front end developer because the front end developer won't even need to process the orders. He or she would get what they want and they would display it to the user, making everything more efficient. So that's the goal, right? That's the end goal. Everything should be efficient and easy to read and easy to follow. Now, pagination is optional, right? If someone just sends you something like this, you should still process it. In this case, you would just return 10,000 orders. If they were 10,000, you will return a million orders if they were a million orders. So it depends on the client. You're giving them extra feature that they might or might not use, but if they want to, it will be good for everyone. It would be a win-win situation. Now, if you learned anything new, I'm really thankful to you for watching the video till the end, right? And when we are being thankful, I have to give the credit where the credit is due. So I was working obviously with API since a long time, but Ronald wrote a great article, and obviously the link is in the description down below. I read this article, and he mentioned all the amazing points that I have mentioned in this video. And when I saw this article, I was like, well, I should share it with my community, right? I should spread the word out so that people make better APIs and they consume better APIs, and everyone learns more. So that was my goal. So I hope I have achieved my goal. I hope you have learned something new. And if you did, please leave us a comment below. And all thanks to Ronald and all thanks to you for watching it till the end of the video. Subscribe, like, and share the video with all your developer friends. And see you next time. Bye.